for joining us here today for the launch of Catskull by Myle Yan Tay. So my name is Erin from the Ethos books team, and I'll be your host for today. I'm wearing a navy blue top, black jeans, and my pronouns are she, her. And first of all, I would like to give a big thanks to 10 Square for hosting us today and for providing this wonderful venue. I would also like to remind the audience members to, if you can, please wear a mask to protect our immunocompromised friends who may be in the audience. And we are also recording the session today, and we may be taking some photos as well. So please approach us if you would not like your photo to be uploaded onto social media. So we also have note takers who will be live transcribing the event for today. Yep, so after the conversation, there will be a Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please go to Slido. You can scan the QR code here, or you can go to slido.com/catskull. If you have any further questions for them, you can send it, type it, send it, and later on we'll take questions. Yeah, so now I'd like to take the chance to introduce our speakers. So Yan is a writer of plays, fiction, non-fiction, comic books, and reviews. And his works have appeared in Panel by Panel, New Narrative, and the Bungalow Review. And he is an associate artist with Checkpoint Theatre. And our moderator for today is Sudhir Vadaketh, and his work is focused on amplifying the voices of people marginalized by dominant power structures. He is the author of Floating on a Malayan Breeze, and he's the co-founder of Singaporean Weekly. So please give a round of applause for our speaker.
Hi, what I thought I'd do is dive straight into the book, and maybe in the last 15-20 minutes we might talk a bit more about process and Yan's literary journey and things like that. So Yan, please tell us what the book is about.
So this book is Catskull. The book is about a disgruntled Singaporean teen who decides to try and fight crime in Singapore, but it all goes wrong. That's how I describe it to people. Yeah, a lot of things happen along the way, a lot of things go wrong, and things keep getting worse.
But you want to talk a bit about just briefly about the sorts of tensions and environmental pressures that this anti-hero, I mean, I kind of call him an anti-hero, I don't know whether you do, but that he faces growing up in Singapore.
Yeah, I feel like the book, I would say he's an anti-hero as well. The unique pressures he faces, so he's trying to fight for justice, but he's also trying to fight for justice within a Singaporean context, and what that looks like is different than it would look like in an American context. And at the same time, the pressures he's going under are different from other stories. So two impending things in Ram's life is his A-levels, his GCSE A-levels, and the other thing is enlistment into national service. And so these two milestones of his life that we consider to be part of every healthy Singaporean male's life journey feel to him more like Damocles' sword than opportunities that he's excited for, which is, he's told he's supposed to be excited for these things, and he's not.
Yeah, I agree. So I want to talk about form next. The book, I guess, is you describe it as 300 micro chapters. Is that correct? And I think I'll talk about form a bit by talking about my own entry into the book and my experience reading it. And so, you kind of start off with these little short chapters, and it's not just that the chapters are short, but there's a beautiful sort of sparseness to the writing as well, which you find with a lot of great fiction. I think Yan sort of sketches outlines of Ram's character, of Ram's relationship with other people, of Cassandra, who's Ram's sort of love interest in a way, friend, good friend, and you have these sketches of Cassandra's relationship with her dad in particular, and there's a lot of opportunity for the reader to sort of fill in the gaps, right? And that's one of the things I really enjoyed. And then you come to chapter 14, I think it's 14, which is the catskull chapter, and I won't say any more about the catskull chapter except that I call it the catskull chapter. And then suddenly, you know, I was reading it PDF on my computer, and I was like, damn, suddenly chapter 14 is like damn long, man. After all these micro chapters, and you know, and there's a lot more. It's a lot more vivid. There's a lot more sort of saturation with aspects of Ram's life and what Ram is doing at that very moment in this chapter. And I think up to that point, you know, because of the sparseness of the writing and because of the micro chapters, right, pre-catskull chapter, I kind of felt like it was very much a dialogue with the author, right? I very much felt a dialogue with you. And then chapter 14 suddenly, because of Ram describing in such vivid detail what's happening in this quote-unquote catskull chapter, I then also felt, you know, it's become a lot more of a dialogue with Ram. So I as the reader was having a dialogue with Ram and understanding a lot more about his thought processes, about what was going on, which is really nice. And yeah, so then I think Yan is now going to read a little bit from page 20, I think.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read, so for people who haven't read the book yet, how many people have read the book? How many people? Okay, great, okay, I'm going to be wary about what I say. I'm not going to try and reveal too much. But for a sense of what Sudhir is talking about the micro chapters, this is chapter 7 of section 1. When he would visit on weekends, Uncle Aaron would take me and Logan down to the playground. I was too small to do much of anything other than hobble around and fall. Logan would climb all over, up and down the blue slide, across that fading red castle, and Uncle Aaron would chase him. We called him Uncle, but in the way it always is, he was not a real uncle, not in the sense of blood. He was my father's best friend in school, the two of them often mistaken for siblings, my father the responsible elder and Uncle Aaron the reckless baby brother. When Uncle Aaron lost his job, he would take us down to the playground any time we liked. But the trips felt emptier, Logan tugging on Uncle Aaron's sleeve, Uncle Aaron saying he was too tired to play, taking swigs from a little bottle in his back pocket. They always say I'm just like him, but I don't know who he was. So that's chapter 7. I think I'm also going to read chapter 9, which is another small chapter. Kass was named after a prophet, Cassandra, a Trojan princess who saw the future. Her premonitions warned her of bad times to come, but no one listened. I never understood why her parents gave her such a cursed name. I would rather be stupid and heard than wise and ignored. Her younger brother is named Paris, a skinny black-haired boy with the same dark eyes as Kass. He's 5 years younger than her, stuttering into puberty. Occasionally he joins us at KFC if Kass has to get him from school. He likes to try sparring with me while she waits for the bus, and sometimes it's too hard. During the June holidays when Kass has to take care of Paris, she brings him to my house in the day when my parents are at work. The two of us will play Rocket Wars and Halo while she barely watches. Lately he's been trying to get me to play Minecraft with him on Kass's laptop, but it strikes me as too kiddie. Paris is probably going to be taller than me. He's already one head shorter than me with 5 years of growing to go. Kass's father is a giant, a former sportsman who used to play shot put nationally. Kass was in track and field for a few years and clearly shared her father's gift. She was on track to play in the SEA Games but broke her wrist 2 months before tryouts started. Now Paris is her father's last hope. He carves out time of his busy schedule to take Paris to 3 weekly training sessions. I would ask Kass what her father's job is, but I know better than to bring him up. My parents parents named me after Rama from the Ramayana. A great hero, they told me. I had never read it. My brother is Lakshman, Rama's brother in the Ramayana, but he goes by Logan now.
Yeah, thanks, Yan. That was, and so as you move down, right? As you move down, I described the micro chapters, the longer chapter that came at 14. But as you go further down the book, you realize that the chapters are structured with a lot of modern forms of communication as well. Social media posts, DMs, instant messaging, newspaper articles, and so again, this sort of gives you a sense of Ram's mind, right? As he's moving through this sort of whirlwind of information that all of us in a way have to live through today, for better or worse. So I wondered if you could just talk a bit about stylistically how you thought about form in terms of different modes of communication and information for Ram.
Yeah, I think so. This book, one of my objectives with this book is to drag the reader sort of kicking and screaming into the psyche of this character. And the micro chapters is part of that. It's part of his fragmented way of views the world, the ways that memories sort of slip in and slip out, things he would like to forget, or things he doesn't need to hold on to, keep drifting back in. And another part of that is what Sudhir is talking about, is that within the book sometimes there's like a newspaper article, or there's a blog post, or in one section there's screenshots of Tinder, and later text messages and missed calls and things like that. And I think those are part of the texture of what it was, of like that also specific time period, because the book isn't set now, it's set in like 2013, right? Like if it was set now, then I would have to like figure out how to put TikTok onto a page. Maybe roll it out, I don't know. But I wanted to get into that very specific headspace of like that sort of burgeoning understanding of what the internet is, and not really knowing what it could be, but it's a sort of connected thing, it affects your life, but it's not the like ever-present thing it is for us now, right? Like there's no, I guess he does have data, we did have data in 2013, right? Yeah, okay, he had data, but
No, yeah, I love the sort of like staccato nature sometimes of the narrative, right? And so it kind of resonates a lot with the way we absorb information today as well. I wanted to ask a simple question: Why write this? Right? What were your motivations? And something you said last week when we had a drink and when we met for the first time in person, was sort of, it's not just about individuals, but there's sort of a system critique that you're trying to make through the book, and how systems might fail us everywhere in the world. But obviously this is set in Singapore, so it's a systemic critique of things in Singapore. And if you could just talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I said earlier that Ram is trying to enact a very specific kind of Singaporean justice. And, but when we think of like superheroes fighting crime, typically we think of like Spider-Man stopping a mugging in New York. But muggings are not necessarily the type of crime we experience in Singapore. And I think that one of the biggest things I was trying to explore with this book was the difference between legal wrongs and moral wrongs. Because we all know there's all sorts of cases where a verdict may come out from the courts and we feel one way, but the court felt another way. And then the question is like, what do we do next? What's the next phase? How do we approach that? Do we adjust our own moral compass, or do we sort of rebel? And Ram takes that to the ultimate extreme. I think he tries to make justice happen on things that he thinks are being left unfinished.
So I wanted to move on from there to some of your inspirations for the book, and we spoke about the sorts of crime that happens in Singapore, and the sorts of pressures and the sorts of simmering tensions that we have and how they manifest themselves in behaviors. And I'll just describe this incident very briefly for the audience, because I think I had read it very briefly, but I forgot about it. And it's a story from 2015. So true story, right? In 2014, it's about a bunch of teens who beat up some migrant workers for fun, almost like their own little fight club type thing. It sounded like. So in 2014, Daryl Lim Junliang, I'm gonna name him, 19, and 3 friends met in Yishun and decided to look for foreign workers to assault. Had to be Yishun, right? Just kidding. So they picked on 4 smaller foreign workers, right? So they targeted. It was premeditated, and it was targeted in the sense of the build and everything, right? Who they wanted to toy with. So they picked on smaller foreign workers who were deemed less likely to fight back. 6 a.m. they spotted a Chinese national, 48-year-old Chinese national, walking along Yishun Avenue 6 and attacked him. So there was Daryl Lim, who was 19. There was a 18-year-old, and there were 2 15-year-olds as well. So Daryl led this little gang. And they punched this 48-year-old guy multiple times in the face and the mouth before fleeing. They also beat up some other people, but the Straits Times report didn't have details of the other people they beat up. It just says this one. Prosecution urged the court to send him to Reformative Training Center, where a stint would be between 18 and 30 months. And the defense, and this is classic Singapore, the defense said, don't send him to this Reformative Work Center because it will affect his future work prospects. And he's got a good record, he's got great grades in school, and the same old story, right? As if straight A's should sort of exonerate you. The judge said that it was important to note that between reformative training and community sentencing, that we didn't want to give him an indelible, quote unquote, indelible criminal record. So at the end of the day, for beating up these 4 workers, Daryl Lim got 10 days of detention. He could have been jailed for up to 2 years and given a $5,000 fine. So anyway, that's the story, and I was interested when we met last week to hear about the different incidences, that kind of affected you and influenced you in terms of wanting to write the story.
Yeah, so the book is split up into 8 parts, and most of those parts are defined by a single major crime that Ram tries to write, and one of those is this crime, but I'm not using the same thing. I alter it, do it a little differently. But there's an instance of domestic worker abuse. There's another instance of migrant worker abuse. There is sexual assault in a school, and there's a gang fight. And those are some of the different things that Ram tries to fight. But this specific one was it's kind of like a nexus of a lot of the themes that I'm trying to unpack with this book about crime, xenophobia, the people who don't really get justice, and also a big part of it is male aggression, male violence, male adolescent violence in particular, which is, right, so like, even as much as that Ram is made angry by this story, his response is similar to what the boys do, right? He continues this path of violence, and that's one of those things I'm trying to untrace with this book, is where does violence get us? And I'm not really providing an alternative. I'm within this book, at least. This book is about the downward spiral of where that takes a teenage boy, right? If his only response to anger is to hit something.
Was that always sort of your conception of the book, the downward spiral, or did it evolve at some? Did you have thoughts about where to take Ram's journey and alternatives to? So
initially, this is
perhaps taking the conversation slightly elsewhere. But initially the book was going to be, I thought it was a short story. And so for anyone who has read the book, or if you're going to read the book, I thought it ended at the end of part 2. And then it didn't. And then I kept going, and I was like, oh, this is much bigger than I thought. And then once I went past that point, I realized very quickly that this was not going to go well. It was just going to keep circling down and down and down and down. And pretty early on, I actually knew, before I knew what like the last 5 cases were, I knew what the ending was. Yeah.
You want to read a bit, maybe?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
From page 107, I think.
107. Okay.
I hope I got my order of events.
Yeah. So one of the things I like about the micro chapters, one of the reasons I went with it, is that it allows me to stitch things between. And rather than just have one continuous scene of things literally happening, it allows me to throw something else in the mix. And so this scene I'm about to read on page 107 is actually in the middle of a fight scene. And so Ram is trying to hold off these 2 boys who are attacking migrant workers, and then this is the scene that happens in between. My father's parents were migrants. They came from India. He's told me the province or the region, but I forget. I only know they were Tamil. He says his grandmother was from a lower caste than my grandfather, which sullied their marriage in their family's eyes. So they came to Singapore, or Malaysia then, to have a new start. My grandfather, a beneficiary of the British education system, spoke fluent English and went from English teacher to discipline master to principal of a neighborhood primary school. My grandmother cooked and raised 3 kids, my father the youngest child. My mother's parents met in Malaysia, though they were both originally from Jaffna. They met entirely through coincidence, both their families shopping at the same markets, unbeknownst to them that they all came from the same place. It was only after they began courtship that they realized his father and her mother were from the same town. My mother says Jaffna is a city, but I've seen the pictures hanging in my grandparents' homes and it hardly looks like a city. When asked, I say I'm a 3rd generation Singaporean. I don't know why the Chinese students in my class are never asked how long their families have been in Singapore. Kass, unlike me, is a mixture of different races. It takes 5 minutes just to list the percentages and races on her mother's side. Sometimes when people ask, she says she's just one of those Eurasians. Her father is simple, a Dutch-Chinese mix. Kass has never met her father's parents. She says her grandfather was a Dutch sailor and her mother a Chinese-Malaysian woman. She doesn't know what they look like. And then it goes back to the fight. Yeah. I think that's the, Sudhir was talking just now about the fragments of the micro chapters, and what my intention with that is that it ends up leaving a lot of space between. On the page, there's a lot of literal white space because a chapter is going to end, 5 lines into the page, right? And the reader is left to think about what's going on between those sections. And it allows me to skip time, skip around. And I think part of it, honestly, is that it's just more fun for me to do it, like as a writer. Like it gives me options to bounce around and suit my own whims, and rather than feel locked into this specific moment. But then there's specific moments, like when they discovered the catskull, that I was like, I had to be like, okay, this has to sit for a while. This part matters. This is a key memory.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I really like that breaking up actually, because you somehow get into the mind of the person a bit more. I feel with that. Although yeah, there's tons of white space in the book, which makes it thick, and that's why it costs a lot of money. Just kidding. Many trees burn for your white space.
I mean, there's, well, let me see. Can I find it? There's one chapter that is just white space. Yeah, and I have, when Ethos was doing the editing, they were like, hey, so, was this on purpose?
And kind of going back to these different incidents in Singapore that kind of influence you. Like one thing we talked about last week, which is quite interesting, is you feeling that, sort of this truth is stranger than fiction type thing, and you're in this little bit of a race against time sometimes with some of your work. Even at Checkpoint, I think there was something you were working on that involved protests at placards, and then like the week after or something, Jonathan was with his smiley face, and could you talk a bit about your process as a writer and when reality catches up with your creativity and how that affects you?
Yeah, I think, one of the realities of working like creatively in Singapore is that it's sometimes something's gonna come up that really happens, and that's gonna affect the thing you're doing. And so there's the incident with the play, where I wrote a play about protest art, and then an activist was arrested for protesting like 2 weeks after. And then I was like, well, okay, I guess that's kind of done. And I think it really depends also on tone. Because some people were like, oh, then it's even more important. But my play was like a comedy, it was supposed to be funny. And suddenly it's not funny anymore. And I was like, okay, never mind. But like, so for instance, I mentioned there's an instance of domestic worker abuse within the book. And that one I did quite a lot of research into some of the worst incidences in Singapore. And this is one of those like, truth is stranger than fiction. I actually had to look at those and then dial it back by a couple notches. Because if I presented those as they were, as they really happened, you would read it and you'd be like, there's no way. There's no way another human being could do that to someone. And I think that's just a very peculiar Singaporean thing.
And the stuff that happened in Singapore.
Yeah, the stuff that happened in Singapore.
Yeah.
The stuff that happened in Singapore. It's just one of those, and I don't really know what to do about it. I don't know how you're supposed to handle that. Like other than make sure the thing you write comes out as quickly as possible. Like move to writing a blog instead of writing books. But it just seems like it's a reality of writing in Singapore. I mean, I'm sure you experience this to some extent at Jong as well, right? Like if you're reporting on a story, do you have to wait for it to finish developing? Like, how does it work?
I guess. I mean, I mostly do non-fiction, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of different. We don't. I guess it really depends on the story you're working on. So, for example, if we're writing something about conflicts of interest and ministers renting properties from SLA, right? At what point do we actually tell the story? I think with long form journalism, which is what we do, not daily news reporting, I think there's actually a lot more leeway to take your time. I don't think anybody's really sort of pressuring us to put out something quickly.
Right.
And so, do we write the story about SLA and what we could be doing with colonial properties, or do we, sort of take a step back and wait and think about the larger issue, which is conflicts of interest? So actually, we're planning a piece on conflicts of interest across the whole system, which I think, for the genre that we are in, is actually the more interesting story. I mean, we could focus on the narrow 2 ministers at Rideout Road, but so do events catch up with us? I think events catch up with us sometimes, but it's when you kind of zoom out and focus on these underlying bigger issues, right? There's always an opportunity to write about it again. Sorry, probably a longer answer than you wanted, but yeah.
You're apologizing for answering the question I asked you.
I know, but it's your book launch, man.
Oh, sorry.
You should share the story about the guy with the axe, because that had resonance with catskull.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if people remember this, but I think it was 2021. A disturbed young man brought an axe to his secondary school and murdered one of the other students. And I think I sent my draft of that draft of Catskull to Ethos like 2 weeks before. I don't even really know what to say about that, Like I don't know how to, because part of me was like, oh, should I not do this anymore? You know, like should this book, do I have to change the book to accommodate for that reality? In the end, I didn't.
So that's what you felt that when you saw that news report?
Yeah, I did feel like
you were in Singapore at that time?
I was in Singapore.
Okay.
And I thought like, and part of me was like, oh man, by the time this book comes out, are people gonna be like, oh, he saw that story and then he wrote a whole book about it. He saw this tragic real event and then wrote a whole book about it. But I still, it's still here. I don't know. I mean, we were talking about this, and I'm not really, you know, it's part of the question it raises is then whether there is some like real life resonance to the book, whether the themes to it are potent, are grounded in our reality, and that's the way I thinking about it. Yeah, that's the way I try to think about it.
Yeah. And I'm going to move on to cultural sensitivities because I think it's a good segue. So when you think about these things, and I'll jump a bit further down, but like describing things like this and some in somewhat, I wouldn't necessarily say gory, but you suddenly seem to unearth some of these like tensions that possibly lie within a lot of people, right? And if a young reader sees how that manifests in somebody else, and this is what are your worries with maybe a young person picking up this book, resonating with Ram?
I just hope they get to the ending. I feel like once you get to the ending, you're kind of okay. It's kind of hard. I don't know. I've been thinking about this about the artist in relation to their audience, and how responsible the artist is to an audience, to them as their own decisions, like being able to make their own decisions, be able to make up their own minds. I feel like if we walk down this path, it can end up a little infantilizing.
Sure.
Right? Like if I'm writing a book that's like expecting you, and I'm gonna like constantly signpost, I'm like, but by the way, don't do that. Right? I think that makes for less potent work, and then what they, you know, it's if you being told to do something versus thinking about a thing and coming to your own conclusion on it, the effects of those two things are very different. On this question on like content warning, so at the start of the book starts with a content warning that Ethos and I worked together to create, because I don't know, what were we talking about with accessibility? Give me a cue.
So when I saw the content warning, actually I told you, and I think your friends who read it had kind of differing views on the content warning, right? I was a bit surprised when I saw the content warning. I was like, why do we need a content warning, lah? It's a book. and you know, it's a book. It's a book. Not to diminish the impact and power of some of the actions and violence that happens in the book, but you know, part of me is like, I kind of feel like I should know what I'm getting into if I pick up a book, and I know what the book is, you know, roughly what the book is about. So why do I need a content warning? And you know, that was my sort of sense of it. And then we moved on to talking about, and I think this is sort of a contemporary conversation, not just in fiction, but across, you know, a lot of genres, journalism as well. Like, what kind of language do you use? What kind of signposting do you have for readers before they enter? You know, it's a story about Ukraine, or it's a story about you know, rape victims, or whatever it might be, right? How many signals and warnings you need to give somebody, which has changed over time, and then I think the interesting tension point was, you know, that this idea of we're always going to somehow offend somebody, and how do we write the story we want while diminishing the impact on as many people as possible, right? While still being able to deliver the story that you want.
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes back to intention, right? Like, what is your intention with it? Like, so there's a lot of moments of violence within the book, some shocking violence, but I was trying to come back to like, what is my intention here? If my intention is purely to like upset the reader, and it's got nothing to do with the text, it's got nothing to do with the character, then that's not what I'm trying to do. right? I think we were talking about like, it's with what we know about PTSD and trauma and triggers and things like that, it's okay if you're going to be spoiled, because that's the complaint people give within prose about content warnings. Oh, it's spoiling what's going to happen. But then what it does instead is it raises this challenge of, if you know something of that like is going to happen, the how is more important than the what.
Yeah.
Right? Any book or the most interesting books and movies and art in general, it's more interesting to think about how they're doing it rather than like what literally happens. If we want to know what literally happens, we can just go to Wikipedia and we can read the summary. Yeah.
Yeah. So the content warning might tell you the what, but the challenge then for you is to make sure the how is really interesting for the reader, right?
Yeah.
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 Interesting and not harmful.
Yeah.
Yeah. 'Cause it is possible to write something with intent to harm. I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Sorry, let me just. Should probably. Oh yeah. I see Aaron giving me a time check. Okay. And I think, yeah. So we should. Yan is going to read a section, I think, that kind of touches on this tension.
I think we can skip it.
Skip
Yeah,
that.
skip
Skip
it.
that
Yeah.
reading.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Should we then talk a bit about, I mean, not your direct inspirations for this book, but sort of your broader cultural touch points and influences?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to the how also, because a major influence, so the obvious influences of the book is like vigilante stuff, superhero stuff, crime busting genre. But I would say that structurally the thing the book maps the closest onto is gangster movies. Like Scarface, Goodfellas, Godfather, all of which actually go exactly the same way. The plot is pretty similar. It's then about the how, right? And so there was this specific moment when I was watching Goodfellas by Martin Scorsese for a class or something. And there's this moment when Hank Hill, the protagonist, is having this manic episode, and he's convinced helicopters are following him, and the copious amount of cocaine he has in his trunk. And Scorsese does all these things with the camera and the editing and the acting and all of that to communicate that. And one of my objectives with this book was, okay, what would that look like on the page? Right? How can I recreate that same feeling of mania at that same point in his journey in a book form rather than the film? So I think it was an inspiration plot-wise, but it also was stylistically exciting to see what things I could bring in.
So with the pacing as well, I feel. I mean, when you say recreate that, pacing is a big part of it, right? I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I wanted to make a book that you want to go to the next page on, and that's micro chapters, but that's also tension, that's foreshadowing, that's many things that exist within the page, and a lot of that I pulled from gangster films. Another Scorsese was, I think, a large influence on this book. Another one is Taxi Driver, which is about a New York taxi driver disturbed in his own way who spirals out of control. And this one, we didn't talk about this, but there's this other movie called Deepa, which I forget the name of the director, but it's
Jacques Audiard.
Ah, thank you.
You wrote it down for me.
Thank you.
I'm reading what you wrote for me.
And that movie is a riff on Taxi Driver, but instead of a taxi driver, it's a soldier from the Sri Lankan Civil War who moves to France and is put onto this sort of refugee compound. But the plot of the movie is almost identical. And I think that transplanting was also really exciting for me when I watched it, and subconsciously affected, like, oh, what can I do? What can I bring to Singapore? What is uniquely Singapore?
Interesting.
Yeah, but in the worst ways.
No, but that's great. I mean, that's quite a broad cultural spectrum, right? I mean, what's Taxi Driver, like late 70s or early 80s?
Yeah.
Scorsese?
It's his first movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To 2015.
Yeah. Deepan was 2015.
Deepan, the first time I heard of the film. Interesting.
I think I watched it at the projector.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Thank you, stranger in the crowd.
With your mom.
Who is not my mother.
With your mom.
No, I think she watched it and then she's like, oh, you have to see it. You have to see
Yeah, and
it.
the projector man is here.
The projector man is there.
Everyone, please note, it's going in the notes. Projector man is here.
Something else I have in my notes is that you want to read a bit more, or how are you feeling? We're at 8:15, which is apparently the time
Yeah.
I'm supposed to take questions. So how are you feeling? You want to read a bit more?
I'm alright.
You okay?
You can read the book. It's page 77, so you can read it out loud when you get it.
I hope you all have been sending in questions on this app. I don't know.
Oh yeah, if nobody's sending questions,
Some
I'll read it.
Slido. Hey, my Slido app got nothing, man. How?
No,
Oh, no. Anonymous. Fine. Okay, so I think the first two we can take together. The legal and moral crimes in the book seem to be based on real happenings. Were there moments in the story when you had to overstep the limits of reality? And I guess we can take the second one together. You mentioned truth is larger than fiction. That is deep. Were there any truths that you discovered through writing Catskull? Or you can take them separately.
Yeah, I'll tackle the first one
Sure.
first. I guess the major insertion in the major twist on reality within the book is that Ram is dead. All of the real cases that it's based off of went unresolved. They stopped where the headline does. They stopped where the article does. And my experiment was I'm going to insert this guy who's going to try and correct it. The correcting isn't real, right? And that, for better or for worse, yeah. And the other question was, what truths did I discover in writing this book?
Yep. I mean,
Yeah, that's a tough one.
I don't know what the questioner meant, but truths about yourself, truths about Singapore, could be truths about many things, right?
I'm stumped. I feel like I learned a lot of things about myself as an artist and creatively, about what I need to complete a project like this or to start a project like this. But truths about Singapore.
Or about the male Singaporean condition, aggression.
Oh yeah,
Did-
that's
did you-
Thank you. Yeah.
Did you, while exploring that through Ram, I mean,
Yeah, I think I discovered. I think this book, despite the way the hair may look on the cover, it's not me. it's not autobiography. I didn't do any of these things, and I would never do any of these things. But I think I did discover how frustrated I was when I was Ram's age. I think that was a major discovery for me. He felt like he was a total creation, and at some point I was like, oh man, I was really mad. I was really mad all the time. And I think I just was able to reflect on the things that made me angry in that moment and how many of those things were connected to one another, right? One of the sequences in the book is every other chapter is a present crime that Ram is fighting in between that is instances of Ram remembering his first time seeing a public caning. And that was a connection that I didn't make at all, and that came in a later draft of the book, because I was like, this part is missing something, and and I can't quite tell what it is, and then suddenly it just sort of clicked. I was like, oh, it's that. And then it brought me back to that moment of seeing my first time seeing the public painting, and the way those things just blurred together.
Yeah. Interesting. No, it's right. I like, you know, the memories you have from childhood, right? First time I saw public painting in secondary school, Sec 2, like I only remembered it so much later, the significance of it, right?
Yeah. So that kind of thing just sits in the back of your head,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And maybe it's because you can't really deal with the enormity of it happening in the moment. And so you just push it to the back, and then it just recedes and it comes back at some point.
Yeah. Let me try to sequence this. The questions are there.
Are you gonna try and read them backwards? Okay, I can take one. I can take.
Then
it's gonna be easy.
you just go lah.
Okay. Easy.
Rather than me trying to create a narrative out of the questions that are coming.
I didn't mean to box you out.
Fine. Then go ahead, man.
Did I ever have to take breaks while writing catskull? No, I had to do the opposite. Because the book is about circling in, I would have to write it in long stretches. Especially when I was coming up with it. When I was editing it, I would take breaks and whatever, behave like a normal human being. But I found that the book worked best if I was writing in like a 4-hour spurt into the night, because that's where I needed to go. Would not make for a great night of sleep, which would then help with the writing the next day.
Wait, I'm going to pause you here,
Yeah.
because I think this is interesting from a craft perspective. What you said is that you work on different genres at different times of the day, which I found quite interesting.
Yeah.
Because my practice in craft is very different. So I think you said you prefer to do non-fiction at night. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. No, I'm trying to write something that's heavy, or somewhere where I'm going to need to sort of trick myself into going to a place that I wouldn't want to go to in the middle of the day. I have to do that at night. Because I think those are sort of subconscious barriers we have for ourselves to like not make our day terrible. If I woke up and started writing catskull at the start of my day, I'd just be so grumpy the rest of the day. I'd be a nightmare. And so these little like strategies that you do as a writer, especially when you're working across different projects. There's some projects that it's super easy for me to wake up and just go straight to writing it down. And there's some things that I have to go through my whole day, be spent, and then squeeze out a little bit more.
Yeah. So you might be working on different projects, different genres as well.
Yeah.
And each one has a particular time of the day for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, you can take the next one.
No, that's okay.
Sorry. Okay, I'll read it out for you.
Was there anything you couldn't fit into this book that you wished you could have spoken about or want to explore in another project? That's a great question. So an old draft of this book was called "The Mangroves Hide the Bodies," and instead of the catskull being a big part of it, it was anchored in a core memory of Ram going to a like mangrove forest in, I think, Indonesia on a holiday and being really scared by all the shadows he saw. But I realized that didn't really line up with the book so much, with this book, which was more about urban, like Singapore city, whereas that story, those themes, the themes that were coming out with the mangroves was about urban development. It was about the construction, the building, nature versus the city, things like that. And I do have another project that I'm going to bring that into. And that was an exciting. At first, I was really resistant to taking it out. And then I just had this moment, I was like, no, it's gotta go. It's not doing anything for this book.
How far into the book were you when you made that call?
Oh, like, I finished it.
Oh, really?
So but that was a very, very early draft. That was a really, really very different draft. It was maybe like half this length.
Okay.
Yeah. And there were mangroves. And it was still half the length. Yeah.
But was that connected to any real incident or
No, I
story?
think it's just like, I like to acknowledge that I have fixations, and those fixations come up in the work, right? So at that moment I was really fascinated by the visual of a mangrove. And then you have to just put it away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, catskull is not a bad thing.
Yeah, that's how I like to think of it. It's second place. Yeah.
How are we on time?
We have 5 minutes left.
Okay. Do I have plans for a sequel? I have not yet read this book. No, I don't have plans for a sequel. I don't have plans for a sequel. I think the way I think a lot about endings. I think endings really shape how a text sticks in your brain, and I needed this one to end where it does, and I won't go back to it.
Sorry, can I jump in? I kind
Yeah.
of like this one. You work across a lot of creative genres. How do you know what form a story should take
Oh yeah, okay.
or manifest in?
Yeah.
How do you decide?
That's got a lot to do with the earlier discussion we were having about how, rather than what, right? Because you can tell a story across a bunch of different mediums, but then the question is, what does that media bring to the how of how you're telling it, right? So some things just make sense as a play, and then you have the tools of the play, like the monologue, or actors can play multiple roles, and those create this element of how is this story being told. And I think that's kind of the central thing I go back to, is how is this being told, and how would this specific media enhance the themes of this book, or of this story.
Sure.
Yeah.
But is it very clear, like, Brown Boys Don't Tell Jokes is going to be staged, and Catskull is going to be, or Mangrove is going to be
But
is it clear, or?
I mean, so Brown Boys Don't Tell Jokes, which is a play I wrote that was staged by Checkpoint Theatre earlier this year. That one had to be a play because it's about the spirit of friendship and like the camaraderie, that live camaraderie that comes between 5 friends, right? That being read on the page is super different because you're not seeing these 5 guys in the room together. Catskull, I think if I were to tell the story in a different media, I would have to completely redo it because I would want to think about the how. So, for example, there's a lot of obvious comic book references within the book, and if I were to make it a comic book, I would have to think very differently about how the story is told, because you can't really do first person in a comic book without nauseating the reader. So it's like all through his eyes, every panel. Nobody really does that because it's just not an interesting story. So I have to think about, and then suddenly, if it's a comic book, suddenly we're thinking, okay, now we're looking at it from the outside in. We're looking at Ram, whereas in the book, we're looking through Ram,
Sure.
right? And so that changes everything. What would it mean to be looking at Ram rather than through him?
Oh, if you want to put up your hand, can also, right? Oh, only must submit through here. Oh, if anybody, I'm just saying if anybody is not on this app, then
We have a mic.
yeah, we do have a mic. Oh, there is. Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
not
wait.
sure if you really need a mic.
Oh,
This mic.
doesn't sound like you need a mic, yeah.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations on the book launch, of course. You've tapped into some stories about Ram, so Ram, I don't know if anyone's going to find me, but pronunciation wise. But you tap onto the protagonist and his journeys that he goes through your stories, or through influences. And now I will shift the question a little bit to, these days we are seeing a lot of weird stories in Singapore, and they tend to happen among younger generation, or a lot in the adolescent stage. And what I see every day is that there is a lack of connection between children growing up and actual parenting, or actual physical appearance or presence among them. And you talk about the content warning, maybe people have to find out for themselves what all this means. And I can't help to realize that you feel that this lack of guidance is actually contributing towards these things that are happening. I know it's not a real question, what's the real book like? I was wondering if these are aspects that we thought about, detachment away from something that is like a light of guidance that is influencing these actions. all these stories inside the book? Yes.
Yeah, that's a thank you for the question. I guess. Whew,
That's deep.
if we think about, and that is part of the book also, is this generational divide of not necessarily, because Ram's parents are not unkind parents. They actually try to connect with him, but they don't know how to, because the future they are now living is very different from the future Ram sees for himself. And I think that does connect to what we understand about, the youth today. But we talk about climate change, right? We, at least at my age, I started learning about that, as a teenager. But now they're learning about it even younger, and they're understanding even more how finite perhaps their time is, or this society is. And so these things like these old questions of like, okay, I'm gonna get my house, I'm gonna have my kids, are no longer these anchoring principles that younger kids may have, because they don't know what's gonna be there in 40 years. They don't know we're gonna be up to our necks in water or whatever. And I think that does affect your daily experience of the world, how you feel about your future. And that's part of the book, right? How do you see your future? And do you see a future? And what do you do if you don't?
Yeah. You talk a bit about the editorial process in the book, and it contributed to the final shape of the book, and how.
Yeah, thank you. It definitely did. Ethos is a bunch of wonderful editors. And I think one thing I really appreciated about working with them is this kind of conversation we would have about things. And we had these conversations about, they were like, some things like, I don't know about this. And I'd be like, I really want that. And then we'd talk about it. And then from there, I would be able to make a more informed decision next. And so one of those things was violence. And in particular, there's one specific incident within the book, in an old draft of the book, that the team said, okay, actually, everyone who we've read it in this team, once that moment happens, we can no longer sympathize with Ram at all. It is so difficult for us to connect with him. And I was like, but it's gotta be like that. And then I sat and thought about it, and then based on on the conversation with them, and I realized actually it doesn't, I knew I still wanted it to happen, but how I presented it to the reader changed dramatically. And I think that's a huge shift, because that changed the whole sort of, the events of the book are exactly the same, but how it's delivered are very different. Yeah.
Can you describe, or is it difficult to describe what, in short, what was the quote-unquote problematic aspects of it?
It was, so this, you may not see this, but Christian Mark over here was my great friend who read a draft of the book. When I brought up this incident, he shook his head because he remembered reading it and being like, damn. And the biggest thing about it was that it was vivid detail. It was really just like, it almost like zoomed out from Ram, and it was like just an intense scene of violence in great detail.
Including Ram.
Ram was there. Ram was
Okay.
the enactor of the violence.
Okay.
And then I realized that actually he can still do it, but how he views it is totally doesn't. And in truth, it's more important for him. It's actually almost more interesting and more dynamic if he rejects the memory. And so he doesn't even know it happens. And that's how it's delivered in the book currently. Is that you don't actually know it happens. There's this skipping point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our timing, one more. Last one. Anybody? Or I'll read from my app.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Hi, sorry. I'm just surprised. You mentioned this thing about the watching caning and the impact. And I'm speaking of somebody who's lived a long time in Singapore and who I have watched somebody literally be totally unable to stomach it. I don't think I can stand and watch it. So it's very interesting for me to be in a room where other people seem to understand that. And I mean, even now when I talk, But it happened so long ago. It's exactly it. And I think I get what you say, that sometimes you probably don't understand what it feels like. But it happened that I saw what happened, and there was somebody who really literally could not take it, and it took us several months to actually cope with just the fact of being present, not being from a place. Actually, let's say several generations of a family that have already gone past that. No, this is not the way. And then suddenly to be like, oh, this is modern Singapore, and get used to it. Oh, we know the right way. And I just want to say that this response, I haven't read the book, and I kept saying, no, I can't afford to buy another book. I literally cannot. I have to move out if I have to replace my book. But there's so much in it that you've said today that is so, just wants me. I really have nothing to say about it, because we're living in this again and again, and I can't imagine how terrible it has been. Really. Sorry. Thank you for the book. Yeah.
Thank you so much for
And
sharing.
thank you, Ethos.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Okay,
Yeah. With that, big round of applause for